Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Kazeem Fola, lecturer in Department of English, Olabisi Onabanjo University at OOU. I am to take you on GNS 111, Communication in English. Communication, and we are looking at fundamentals of literary appreciation. Under fundamentals of literary appreciation, we are looking at meaning of literature, functions of literature, and figures of speech. The first question to ask is, what is literary appreciation? It is a concept in literature that involves reading, understanding, and making a critical judgment of the theme, style, use of figurative and non-figurative languages, as well as other elements of literary works. They highlighted, that is, reading, understanding, making judgment of the theme, the style, and the use of figurative and non-figurative language, are central to the study of literature. Other concepts that would be looked at include literary criticism, literary theory. Literary criticism is the study, analysis, and evaluation and interpretation of literature, while literary theory is the body of ideas and methods that we use in the practical reading of literature. Literary theory, therefore, refers not only to the meaning of a work of literature, but as those components that are used to bring about what the work of literature could mean. So, literary appreciation as a concept cannot be conceived without the availability of literature. In other words, we call it literary appreciation. It is only useful when we talk in terms of literature or the imaginative writings. First of all, we go into the meaning of literature, and based on that, we'll be looking at the tools that we are going to be using for the analysis. First, we are going to categorize between a general, broad perception of literature and the restricted description of literature. In the general or the broad sense, it is a written or printed material, including leaflets in drugs, equipment, manuals, books on any subject or discipline. And in the restricted form, we talk about literature as imaginative writing, especially prose fiction, poetry, and drama. As an extension of that, we'll be including oral literature, and these are some spoken or chanted forms that are in their transcribed form. In terms of definition of literature, we'll be looking at literature as, according to William Long, the expression of life, words of truth and beauty, written record of man's spirit, of its thoughts, emotions, aspirations. It is the history, and the only history, of the human soul. Why is it described as the history and the only history of human soul? It is because literature emanates from the soul, from the inner mind of human beings. It is not superficial, it is so deep. Then we also look at another definition which says literature is written or spoken text, like we did in considering oral literature earlier. It has different genres. either made to be read, such as poetry, drama, and other narratives, poetry, drama, and prose. The language that is used in literature is either completely or partly symbolic. When we talk about symbolic language in literature, we talk in terms of a situation where work of literature or some of the things written there are used not for literal meaning, but having literary meaning. They have second meaning beyond the ordinary meaning that people know them to have. Another definition is according to J. Mayer, which says literary work have the prototypical characteristics, which include careful use of language, being written in a literary genre, prose, poetry, fiction, and drama, and being read aesthetically and containing many weak implications. Here we have the issue of aesthetics. Even when it is prose, poetry, and drama, we have the issue of aesthetics involved. And what is aesthetics? Aesthetics, some people will tell you it is the study of beauty. Yes, but it is deeper than that. Because when we talk about aesthetics, we talk about the appeal that the work of literature is capable of carrying or having. And that it contains many implications, meanings that it carries meaning. The meaning might not be sacrosanct, but meaning that relates with our lives, with our daily experience as human beings. Then we come to the characteristics of good literature. Well, what is good literature? We want to look at the difference between good literature and bad literature. Good literature is a work of literature well written, well composed, well thought out, and well presented. And when we talk about bad literature, those ones are lacking in those characteristics that I have mentioned, are not well written, not well thought out, not well presented, and so on and so forth. The characteristics of good literature: one, timelessness. Timelessness. This is seen in the ability of literature to remain relevant over the years, even while shifting issues of different generations. The next one, eternity. This has to do with the fact that a literary work has neither a beginning nor an end, and could also be seen in its inherent emotional overtones, which serve to astonish, weary, or confound those who attempt to grasp such work. The next one is the universality of literature. Speaking of the universality of literature, means the ability of a literary work to appeal to the heart and mind of almost any reader across gender, race, and cultures. The next one is permanence. Work of literature is a permanent expression in words of some thoughts or feeling or ideas about life and the world. Then we come to the forms of literature. Speaking about the forms of literature, we have mentioned them before. They are in three forms: prose, poetry, and drama. The above mentioned have their equivalents also in oral literature, because in oral literature we'll be talking about poetry, oral narratives, and performatives. We speak about performatives rather than performance because performance is sacrosanct to all subgenres of oral literature, and therefore, rather than talking in terms of performance, being presentation of performance, presentation of activities, presentation of tales and all the rest, we speak about the dramatic form, not as performance but as performatives. We pick the first one, which is the poetic subgenre. The first one to be seen there is the lyric, and then we have epic, we have sonnet, we have ballad, and we have odes. All of these have their meaning. In epic, you see what we call an extensive performance of heroic activities in prototypical characters that represent all forms of attitudes, all forms of behavior, all forms of character, of forms of representation. We have all those ones, and epic is continental in nature in terms of the setting and the activities that epic embody can be described as very important and quite important to the life of everybody. Then we have the lyric, which has to do with the presentation of poetic types that are sung, and then we have sonnet, which is the 14-line poetry, and then we have ballads that are written in quatrains. Then we have odes that are dedicated poetic form. Other variants include pastorals, confessionals, echo poetry. Pastorals brings to us the ideal life of nature. Confessionals are the kind of poetry in which people confess whatever they have done, either to themselves or to other people, or those things that happen in the recesses of their mind. And echo poetry talks about the kind, that they are about the poetic forms that explore nature, that seek to protect and defend nature, especially human intervention and destruction on nature and so on. Then we have those elements of poetry that we should be looking for when we have poems before us. We have verses and stanzas. These are some of the elements. Verses and stanzas, meaning that poetry is written in lines, and they are written in arrangement of lines, which is the stanzas. Some of them are written in book, like epics are written in books, like Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. They are written in books. Paradise Lost, book 1 to 10. Paradise Regained, book. Some books also. That is what we find in that is what we see in epic form. Then the lyric form is free form. Usually they are sung, sonnet, 4-line poems, and all the rest. So we come to rhyme and rhythm. Rhyme and rhythm measure musicality in poetry. When you talk about rhythm, you talk about the rules of prosody, and when you talk about rhymes, you talk about the end rhymes, internal rhymes, and initial rhymes, where some syllables look alike, and they either spelled the same or they are pronounced the same way. Then we have image and imagery. Image and imagery, they are picturesque use of words. When words conjure images in the mind of the reader, then you have poetic appeal. Like I told you, there is a way in which poetry appeals to your senses, sense of sight, touch, hearing, and so on and so forth. Then we have the poetic license. In poetic license, we see the ability in poetry to name anything, to mention anything, to say anything. Then we have the poet persona, which is the speaking voice inside a piece of poetry. And then we have the tone and the attitude. This tone and attitude look alike. Tone belongs to the text, and attitude belongs to the speaking voice in a text of poetry. Then we have the theme, we have language. We don't really talk about language, really, we talk about it in terms of diction, because poetry is about language use, and we want to look at diction more than language. Diction is the language, but specifically and deliberately use of language is what we call the diction. And we have the figures of speech, simile, metaphor, personification, alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia, exaggeration, irony, metonymy, and so on. These are some of the figures of speech that we have. Then we come to forms of prose. Prose fiction and non-fictional prose are the two forms of prose. When you hear fiction, it means it is imaginative. It is imaginative. It comes from the thought, very deep thought of somebody, possibly a writer. When you say non-fictional, you talk about the ones that is true to life, that is that is based on things that happen, like history, travelogue, and all the rest. Then you have in prose fiction, you have the novel, you have the novella, you have the novelette, you have the short story, all of which are individually marked by a volume. Then you have, in the non-fictional, you have prose, you have biography, you have autobiography, you have memoirs, you have travelers, you have text messages, and they must be about things that actually happen in our daily experience. However, between the fictional and the non-fictional prose, the issue of realism is very important. And when you talk about realism, you talk about the closeness of the events, of the activities, of the happenings in the work of literature to the real human experience, to the real life experience. And that is what we have. And the elements of prose, book, chapters, paragraphs, themes or subject matter, characters and characterization, plot, setting, point of view, dialogue, monologue, as the case may be, narrative techniques, and also figures of speech. We discovered that figures of speech, the use of figures of speech is common in all forms of literature because they are all creative and imaginative works. They are all creative and imaginative works. Then we come to drama, forms of drama. Drama has to do with performance on stage, what we call, some people otherwise call the play. Yes, and in that, in the dramatic forms that we have include tragedy, comedy, and tragicomedy. The elements of drama include scenes, which are division of acts. We have acts which are division of the play. Then we have themes, we have subject matter, we have characters who are human elements. We have plot, which is about presentation of events. We have setting, which is the background. We have dialogue and monologue, which has to do with speech presentation or thought presentation. Then we have conflict, and we have a figure of speech. In every drama, you have conflict, and once the conflict is resolved, the dramatic work, the dramatic presentation ends. Then we come to the functions of literature. Primordially, from the beginning, literature has two functions, which is to teach and to delight. To teach means to impart knowledge, and to delight means to make happy. When you look at these two, Other forms of functions, other functions come up as a result of these two, and these include enhancement of good upbringing. When you read literature, it is capable of making you learn how to behave, how to relate with people, how to accommodate others, how to be a good person. The next one is healing. Literature has the capacity to heal, and that is one of the things we see in a tragedy, the healing value of tragedy. Literature enhances knowledge, literature enhances memory, literature helps in the preservation of culture, literature helps in the transmission of culture, literature enhances economic growth. Yes, those who write books, those who perform, those who do all sorts of things, they make money, and therefore it enhances their economic growth. Literature makes you able to think critically, because literature is an experience. It is experiencing. It helps you to think deep. Literature also helps to criticize and correct wrongdoing through satire, burlesque, and all the rest, even irony. Then literature helps to enhance the act of resistance. And this is what people use literature for in most areas like East Africa and South Africa, where they use literature to ask important national questions, and so on and so forth. Then we have figures of speech. A figure of speech is a word or phrase. It's a word or phrase using figurative language that has other meaning than its normal definition, than the dictionary definition. And that is what I was trying to talk about when I was discussing symbolic or non-symbolic language. In other words, figures of speech rely on implied or suggested meaning, what we call connotative or literary, rather than dictionary meaning, which may be called denotative or literal meaning. Figures of speech are expressed and developed through hundreds of different rhetorical techniques, from specific types like simile. Simile is a form of comparison in which one item sharing certain features of another is said to be like it or as it. For example, he is as black as charcoal, his heart is as hard as stone, and he sprints like a cheetah on the pitch. In the first one, the characteristics shared is blackness. In this second one, the characteristic shared is the hardness. And in the third one, the characteristic shared is sprinting, that is running, dashing. The second one, metaphor. This is a comparison where one item is said to be equal to another, where one is said to be equal to another without the use of as or like. For example, he is a cheater on the pitch, unlike the first one where we said he sprints like a cheater. This one says he is a cheater on the pitch. The second one says this man has a heart of stone. And the third one, the third example says he is charcoal skin. So all those like, as we saw under simile, are gone. They are not used. Meaning that in metaphor you see a situation of direct comparison, whereas in simile you see what you see is different. It's not as direct. Then we come to personification. Personification involves talking about a non-living or lifeless object as if it has life. In other words, it could be described as assigning human characteristics to a non-human object. For example, the flowers are dancing merrily under the control of the wind. Flowers, non-human, and they are performing human activities, dancing merrily. They are joyous, they are happy. And who is controlling? Not a man, but wind. The wind is singing to the flowers, and the flowers are dancing. You can see what somebody will call anthropomorphic reference. The sun has completed its race across the sky. The journey of the sun from the east to the west across the sky is considered as a race, and the sun that is non-human is running that race. The sky whips. That's the second one. The sky is sweeping. And if you ask me what is happening, it is raining. When it rains, somebody can talk about that imaginatively as the sky weeping, and the sky is non-human and does not feel, cannot feel, and therefore cannot weep. And that is what personification can do. The next one is hyperbole. Hyperbole, which some of us call hyperbole. This is deliberate and ridiculous form of exaggeration. For example, he finishes the mountain of food in the plate. Mountain of food, that should tell you about the size of what that person has devoured. So it is the sense of eating of that person that has been ridiculed. The next example is, before him was a sea of faces. Sea of faces. Sea of faces. When so many people are looking at the person at the same time, that has been exaggerated as sea of faces. The next one, there was so much beer that he got drawn in the liquor. It means that this person became drunk because he is greedy. His sense of, his lack of restraint is what is being ridiculed. He cannot restrain himself because he saw free drinks. He started to throw caution to the wind. The next figure of speech is senedoki. 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 This is a figure of speech in which the name of a part of an object is used as the name for the whole object, to refer to its constituent part. For example, we have the first one: a few capable hands are left. A few capable hands are left. In other words, those people who are left are just, many of them are not useful. They are not good, and very few capable hands. You see, capable hands, people that know how to do things, expertise. Talking about the expertise of people who know what they are doing, people who can be in control, people who have the know-how. Very few of them are left behind, and the capable hands is referring to full-fledged human being who own other parts of the body beyond the hands. Young persons must respect the heads, human heads, and in this instance, it means leaders, and so on and so forth. The next one, Aso Rock has remained silent over the matter. Aso Rock, which is the seat of government of Nigeria, they use to refer to the leadership, maybe president or some of his representatives, and he's talking about them in terms of being called Aso Rock, rather than the president or the secretary to the state or the vice president or whatever. Then we come to the next one, which is Chisirony. This figure of speech is a figure of speech in which words are used to express the opposite of what is intended. For example, everyone enjoyed being beaten silly by the rain. Being beaten by the rain is a kind of an embarrassment, and saying that everybody enjoyed it. In other words, everybody felt terrible. Everybody um, um, felt terrible by being beaten by the rain. Nobody will feel happy to be beaten by the rain, to being beaten by the rain. The thief was so clever not to avoid being caught. Well, if a thief deliberately runs into the hand of those who um, catch him for stealing, then that cannot be any cleverness. That can only be foolishness, because no one would like to be caught in the act. Then the next one, the dancer amused the spectator by not knowing the right step to take. And this one is also as embarrassing. Uh, the amusement that he created is by being stupid, by not knowing the right step to take in a dance. So that cannot be complimentary. It is something else. It cannot be complimentary. Well, figures of speech make up a huge portion of the English language, thus making it more creative, more expressive, and more interesting. In fact, figure of speech sometimes is what people um, read in poetry. Some people may not know how to handle figure of speech because some of the meaning could be lost on them. But likely, if someone understands the impulse of figure of speech, at least one could say that such a person knows almost 30-40% of what literature is all about, because literature is the imaginative use of language. Then we come to the last lap of uh, the lecture, which is the graphological features. Graphological features. What happens in graphological features is that we see the application of linguistic strategies to the analysis of poetry for the purpose of achieving certain visual communicative effects. Don't forget that we talk about literature uh, in terms of writing and in terms of speaking. And there is always a way in which some of these appeal to the visual sense of human beings. Through these features, a critic can reasonably explore and give description of the physical appearance of a literary text. That's what I keep telling people, that when you see a text before you, you should be able to determine whether it is poetry, it is drama, or it is a prose. You should be able to determine. But some people will tell you you need to read first before you determine. Yes, that is true, because there is sometimes the boundary among these forms could be so tiny sometimes, and therefore the importance of the advice that one should read first before doing anything. Uh, a corresponding study, of language writing system elements in graphology include punctuations, use of punctuations, comma, semicolon, full stop, and all the rest. Uh, that is what you find in graphology. And also you have paragraphing. Paragraphing exists in prose writing and all the rest. In poems, you also have punctuation. You have the use of punctuation. You have rhyme. You have alliteration. You have assonance. And then there is the use of morphology Graphology comprises of affixation and compounding. And what is affixation? That is the addition of a prefix and suffix to the to a base word, to a root word, a root word. And compounding is when you use a dash to join two independent words to bring about a new meaning. Thank you for the class, but let us do a rerun, a rehash of what we have. Let us run through some of the things we have done in this course. In this lecture, let us do some of the things. Let us run through some of the things we have done. Like I told you, we have looked at what literature is about by looking at the different definitions. We have also looked at such terms as literary criticism, literary theory. We looked at the general perception of literature and the restricted perception of literature. We look at the definition of literature, the one by William Long and the other one by J. Mayer. Then we look at the characteristics of good literature, and in that wise we spoke about the timelessness of literature. Also spoke about the eternity, the work of literature. We spoke about its universality, and we spoke about its permanence. Then we looked at the form of literature, viz. Poetry, prose, and drama. We looked at elements of poetry, elements of prose, and we also look at the elements of drama. Then we come to the issue of figures of speech. We look at the functions of literature, and in that regard, we spoke about how it enhances good upbringing, how it brings about healing, how it enhances good knowledge, enhancing memory, preservation of culture, transmission of culture, enhancing growth, economic growth, sharpening critical thinking, criticizing and correcting wrongdoings, and enhancing the act of resistance. In figures of speech, we look at simile, we look at the metaphor, we look at personification, we look at hyperbole, we look at synecdoche, and we look at the irony, and so on. Then we look lastly at the graphological features of the English language. And thank you so much for listening as we bring to the end the lecture of today. That is the night week in GST111. Thank you.